the hearing on the question of whether OSHA's penalties are adequate to deter health and safety violations. This is an effort to explore whether current penalties are adequate to protect the health and safety of American workers. This hearing is fitting that we recognize Workers' Memorial Day today. This day honors the thousands of workers who fall sick or are injured or killed each year due to hazardous conditions on the job. The landmark Occupational Safety and Health Act became the law in 1970, opening the door to safer and healthier workplaces for millions of workers. In nearly 40 years in its existence, the Act protections have saved hundreds of thousands of lives and millions more have avoided exposure to preventable illnesses and injuries. I applaud the hard work of those Occupational Safety Health Administration employees who ensure that workers can return home to their families safe and healthy after their shift. However, over the last decades, evidence suggests that we have seen an erosion of workplace protections guaranteed by the Occupational Safety and Health Act. The erosion of OSHA's effectiveness was particularly acute during the last several years. Beginning in the last Congress, the committee and Ms. Woolsey's subcommittee conducted a systematic examination of OSHA and the agency's ability to adequately protect workers. Since assuming the majority, we have held at least 15 hearings into workplace health and safety issues, most often issues regarding the failure of the last administration to properly protect American workers. We found that well-documented hazards, like the exposures to chemicals that cause popcorn lung disease, the combustible dust dangers, as well as basic regulatory work like updating construction standards, were not being addressed. In fact, OSHA's regulatory function shut down. The Bush administration promulgated only one significant health and safety standard during its tenure, and that was under court order. Additionally, we found that the enforcement tools were left on the shelf at times. These facts uncovered by the committee show that the last 8 years have left OSHA significantly weakened. OSHA has the ability to reverse some of the problems with new leadership, and that's why I'm confident that Labor Secretary Hilda Solis will be able to get the agency back on firm footing. But good leadership alone may not be enough to sufficiently protect workers' health and safety. Long overdue reforms to the OSHA Act are needed. Last week, Representative Woolsey introduced Protecting America's Workers Act. This bill will update OSHA penalties, strengthen whistleblower protections, and ensure that bad employers are held accountable. This legislation is vital to improving the worker health and safety. Today's hearings will examine the adequate OSHA penalties, and we'll look at whether Congress should modernize and strengthen penalties against those who put Americans at unnecessary risk while at work. Penalties under OSHA were last updated in 1990 and were not indexed for inflation. And these penalties for failing to protect workers pale in comparison to penalties for failing to protect animals or environment generally. While both civil and criminal penalties are available under OSHA, criminal prosecutions for egregious behavior of the law, violations of the law, are only possible when willful violations lead to the death of a worker. Even then, no matter how bad an employer acted, killing a worker is only a Class B misdemeanor. Under federal law, harassing certain animals can bring twice as much prison time as killing a worker with willful health and safety violations. While the law currently provides low penalties for health and safety violations at the outset, those penalties often get lower. Unscrupulous employers often avoid being held accountable by their actions by negotiating fines down or away altogether. This is exactly what happened in the Las Vegas Strip during a particularly dangerous year and a half when 12 workers died on the construction site. George Cole testified before our committee last June on how Project City Center in Las Vegas negotiated away all of the penalties for violating safety rules in private, while that directly related to the death of his brother-in-law. This is an outrageous example, but negotiating away egregious violations is not uncommon, as we will hear today. Penalties are often key enforcement mechanisms under OSHA, but they must be real, they must be meaningful, and they must function to deter violations. They must get people's attention. And these enforcement mechanisms must not be a mere cost of doing business. Today we will hear testimony on the need to update and modernize the key enforcement mechanisms under OSHA.